I'm Mara Ellison, 36, and the ringtone I saved for my mother is an old country chorus she used to hum while stirring Sunday gravy, the kind of sound that makes a house feel lived in. My laptop rests across my knees, a spreadsheet glowing with neat columns and stubborn questions when her voice comes through bright and careful, meant for announcements that sound like celebrations. I angle the phone to speaker and tell her I'm almost finished with a client proposal, the one that might pay for the new copier and a full-time data analyst. She pauses just long enough to make the air go still, then says my brother has wonderful news, and I sit up without meaning to. She names a neighborhood across town where the sidewalks curve under old maples, and the price of belonging starts high and goes higher. I swallow, remembering the spring I lost a bid there by a whisper and told myself it wasn't meant to be. She keeps talking, but a different chime cuts through her voice, a bank alert that doesn't belong to this moment. I freeze with my finger over the screen, the brightness of it painting my hand a cold blue. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever carried your family's weight in quiet ways, tap like and subscribe so more women can find this story. I grew up in a modest house on the edge of a Midwestern city where winter makes you practical and neighbors notice when your porch light goes out. My parents believed in thrift and showing up, the kind of rules that put casseroles on a grieving family's steps and keep a car running 10 years past its pride. I believed in school and early mornings, then internships. No one envied the ones that teach you to hear the faint engines behind the numbers most people don't want to think about. By 30, I'd built a small firm that helps clinics plan for the next quarter and the next storm. The work isn't flashy, but it keeps the doors open for people who need a doctor on a Tuesday afternoon. My brother lived closer to the soft parts of life, new jobs that looked good on paper, and friends who always had a lead, and I made room for that because every family balances differently. My mother called me steady, the way some people say storm shelter, and I wore it without complaint. When my father's insurance lapsed after a contracting job ended, I opened a joint account to move money quickly for appointments and prescriptions, telling myself that convenience was the same thing as trust. When property taxes surprised them one fall, I sent the payment and marked it in a private ledger. I never showed anyone a habit I didn't question because it kept the peace. Holidays came with matching sweaters and the kind of laughter that gets louder when a joke lands close to the truth, and I told myself that was normal, that families talk around things to keep dinner warm. If my work was waved away as consulting, while my brother's new start was toasted like a promotion, I pretended not to notice, because noticing makes you the difficult one. The neighborhood my mother mentioned sits on the north side, where brick tutors line the streets, and the maples throw late afternoon shade across stone pathways. I fell for one of those houses last year, stood in the foyer turning a brass knob that felt like it had waited for me, then watched another family's offer edge mine out by a breath. I don't begrudge a dream when someone else gets there first. I just get back to work and wait for the next door to open. Still, when my mother said Luke would be closing there next week, the words didn't settle right, as if a picture had been rehung slightly crooked and everyone pretended not to see it. She said I'd always been independent, as if the trade itself could explain the math of a house like that. I looked at my laptop, the contracts, the projections, the careful plans that made my life make sense, and wondered what I wasn't being told. There's a kind of quiet that comes before you admit something to yourself, and the kitchen filled with it, while my mother described landscaping dreams and Thanksgiving in a bigger dining room. I thought about how our family talks about money only when it's sentimental, never when it's technical, and how questions can sound like accusations, even when you mean them like handrails. I stared past the window to a strip of sky and told myself to breathe, to keep my voice light, to nod in the places where nodding keeps the peace. The alert on my phone pulsed again, small and insistent, a reminder that numbers wait for no one's feelings. I told my mother I'd call her back after I wrapped up my proposal, and she answered with a cheerful, "We'll see you for brunch," as if the plan had already been made. When the line went quiet, I let the spreadsheet fade and watched the alert expand on the screen, a line of text that tugged at a thread I'd tucked away more than once. The house I lost the word independent, the casual way good news can tilt a room, all of it hovered while I tried to decide whether I was being protective or simply prepared. My thumb hovered over the notification the way it does when a choice feels small and turns out not to be. The sound of the city drifted through the window, an engine turning over, a dog barking 2 yards away, the steady life of a block that knows itself. And I felt the old habit of smoothing things down settle in my shoulders. Then the screen brightened, and a new message pushed to the front, a detail that didn't belong to the story my mother had just told. I opened it, and the first line changed the temperature of the room, setting the next Sunday in motion long before anyone sat down at the table. The alert on my phone blinked again as I stood by the window, the faint hum of traffic floating up from the street below. Unusual activity detected on closed account. My pulse skipped. I stared at the notification, tracing the numbers with my eyes. It was the same joint account I had opened years ago to cover my father's medical bills, the one I'd officially closed last month. I tapped the screen, confirming the date and time, my chest tightening with something that felt both familiar and foreign. Before I could think it through, I hit call on my mother's contact. Her voice came through light and cheerful, still carrying that Sunday brightness. "Mara, honey, everything all right?" I steadied my tone, saying I had to handle something for work. She laughed softly. "Always working, that's my girl. You'll wear yourself out one of these days." I hung up before she could say anything more. The next morning, sunlight filled my kitchen, glinting off the rim of my coffee mug. My phone sat on the counter, silent, but heavy with the memory of that alert. I opened my laptop, creating a new document out of habit. The words at the top of the page appeared almost without thought: Family Ledger. In the first column, I typed $85,000 gift to Luke for down payment. In the next, $0 support to Mara. The sound of the keyboard steadied me, a rhythm I could control. My fingers hesitated over the last entry before closing the screen. Numbers, at least, never lied. By Sunday, the entire family gathered for brunch at my parents' house. The sun poured through the big bay window, turning the glass pitchers of orange juice into small glowing lanterns. My mother moved around the table with her usual grace, setting down platters of biscuits and fruit as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. I was kneeling beside her chair, showing her how to adjust the camera on her phone so we could take a family picture. My father and Luke were shoulder to shoulder, beaming with pride, as Sam leaned in the kind of effortless warmth that photographs well. I tapped the shutter, and a notification slid across the top of the screen, a group message. My finger brushed it by accident, and the thread opened before I could look away. The name at the top read, Ellison Family Chat. No Mara. My eyes caught fragments of messages as I scrolled. My father. Closing on the house tomorrow. My brother finally got the place that couple wanted last spring. My mother, remember to check Mara's account before she notices. I froze, the laughter around the table fading to a distant hum. There it was, my bidding war house, the one I'd loved and lost. The family I was photographing had outbid me with my own money. My mother's voice brought me back light and unsuspecting. "Are we good, sweetheart?" I nodded, forcing my hands to move to act normal. "Perfect," I said, and slipped back into my chair. Luke was talking about replacing the roof. Copper accents, architectural shingles, he said proudly, like he was designing a castle instead of a house. Sam chimed in, 18,000, right? The words hung in the air. I set my water glass down carefully. "That's a big project. How are you covering that on your landscaping salary?" My tone was calm, almost curious, but the room went still. My mother's fork paused in midair. "Why must you be so harsh?" Mara, always turning everything into an interrogation. My father's voice followed, measured and sharp. "That tone is unbecoming. You talk about money like it's a competition." Luke smirked, buttering another biscuit. "You've always been obsessed with counting every penny. Some of us just want to live a little." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. My mother folded her napkin into perfect squares. Her lips pressed tight. "We're helping him with the yard," she said quickly. "The trees need attention, and it's an investment in the property." Sam reached for her hand. "Your parents have been amazing. I don't know what we'd do without them." I felt the room tilt again, not from surprise this time, but from the weight of knowing exactly how that help had been financed. My phone buzzed in my pocket. When I glanced down, a name I hadn't seen in years lit the screen: Riley Grant. The cousin who had disappeared after an argument about my grandmother's estate. The message was short: "We need to talk about Florida." Before I could reply, another text arrived from Hayden. "Found forged signatures on property transfer. Call me immediately." The noise of the table faded into background static. I excused myself, saying I needed to check something for work. No one stopped me. They never did when business was the excuse. In the hallway, I lifted the phone to my ear. Hayden's voice was brisk. "Mara, the paperwork you sent me last month. The sale records. Someone forged your signature." I closed my eyes for a moment, the air shifting in my chest. "That timeshare transfer was never authorized," she continued. "We're looking at something serious here." My reflection in the hallway mirror looked composed, but the skin along my neck prickled. I told her I'd review everything tonight. She agreed to call again in the morning. When I stepped back into the dining room, Noelle was there, unexpected, but calm, holding a manila folder. "Sorry to interrupt, but these need your signature before 5, she said politely, her eyes giving away something she couldn't say aloud. My mother gasped softly. "You brought work to brunch?" My father sighed, leaning back in his chair. "This attitude, Mara, it's hurting your relationships. Your brother knows when to leave his work at the door." Luke smirked behind his mimosa. "Maybe if you weren't so calculated, you'd find someone who could put up with you." The words landed like small stones, not painful by themselves, but heavy together. I accepted the folder, thanked Noelle, and stood. My voice stayed steady. "Excuse me, I need a moment." In the bathroom, the cool marble counter pressed against my palms. The woman in the mirror looked the same: neat hair, calm eyes, but something inside her had shifted. I opened the folder, finding years of records transfers, checks, emails, organized in Noelle's precise handwriting. A note stuck to the top read, "You didn't imagine it. It's all here." I took a breath and folded the papers back into the envelope. There was no room left for pretending. That night my phone rang just after midnight. The name on the screen was Luke. I almost let it go to voicemail but answered. His voice was strained, half apologetic, half demanding. "Mara, I need help." The inspector found black mold in the attic. "I need $18,000 to fix it before closing." I stared at the dark window across the room, the faint city lights blinking against the glass. "That's not a small number," I said evenly. "Did you talk to the bank?" He hesitated. "They can't extend the loan this late. Mom and Dad said you could help. You're flush from that healthcare contract." The stillness between his words told me everything. I let him finish his plea before answering. "I can't help you, Luke." A pause, then his voice hardened. "Can't or won't. We're family." I said nothing else before ending the call and blocking his number. By morning, there were 3 voicemails from my mother. Her voice shifted from concern to guilt, wrapping the word family in every sentence. I deleted them without listening to the end. When I reached the office, Noelle met me at the elevator with coffee in one hand and worry in her eyes. "Your parents are here," she whispered. "They've been waiting in the conference room for 20 minutes. I stood still for a moment, the quiet hum of the elevator doors filling the space. "Tell them they have 15 minutes, I said, and followed her down the hall. My mother rose the instant I entered, arms open, as if a hug could reset everything. My father stayed seated, scanning the room as though calculating its square footage. "Darling, we've been so worried," my mother began. I stayed standing. "What's so urgent?" My father cleared his throat. "Your brother's house. The inspection revealed some issues." "I'm aware," I said. "He called last night." My mother clasped her hands together. "We've already done so much for him. We thought you could cover this one small repair." "Small." The word echoed between us. I looked from one parent to the other. $18,000 is not a small repair." My father's jaw tightened. "Your brother needs help, Mara." I met his eyes. "And I needed help last spring when I lost the bid on that same house. You told me to wait, that the market would cool." The silence that followed was long enough to feel like truth. Then Noelle appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Ellison, your Kensington clients are in the lobby." I nodded. "Thank you, Noelle." Turning back, I said quietly, "I have work to do." My mother's face faltered, a confusion that bordered on disbelief. "Why are you being like this?" she asked. Like what? I replied. Independent. They left with polite smiles and promises to sort things out. I watched them go, a strange calm settling over me. 2 hours later, a credit alert buzzed through my phone. I opened it expecting a mistake, but the message was clear. Unusual activity on Visa account ending in 4719. I'd never opened an account with that number. The next few hours blurred into phone calls, documentation, and one confirmation after another, new credit lines in my name, charges from stores I'd never visited, even a truck loan with my forged signature. Hayden's voice was steady when I finally called her. "This isn't carelessness, Mara," she said. "This is a pattern. How soon can you meet?" I looked at the darkening city outside my office window. "Tomorrow morning," I said. She paused before adding, "And Mara, change your locks." As I hung up, Noelle stepped into the doorway holding another envelope. "Riley called," she said quietly. "She wanted me to hand this to you personally. She said it's about your grandparents' Florida property." The room seemed to narrow, the walls shifting closer as I took it from her hands. Inside was a stack of notarized documents, each stamped and dated. At the top, my forged signature smiled back at me. I turned to the next page, seeing the will I'd never known existed, a separate inheritance in my name, money I'd never received. The day had turned to dusk before I set the papers down. The city outside glowed faintly in the window's reflection, and for a long moment I just stood there listening to the hum of the lights. The surface of everything I'd accepted as normal was cracking open, and beneath it lay something colder, something real. When my phone rang again, it was Hayden's number. Her first words were quiet, but they landed with the weight of a verdict. "This isn't just family taking advantage," she said. "This crosses into criminal territory." I didn't answer right away. The truth didn't need words yet. It just needed to be faced. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, marking the start of a long night that wouldn't end the same way it began. The next morning came gray and slow, the kind of quiet that makes coffee taste stronger than it should. The stack of documents Riley had sent still sat in front of me on the kitchen table. I hadn't slept much. Every few minutes through the night, I'd reach for one of the pages again, scanning the same sentences just to make sure I hadn't imagined them. My name signed in a hand that wasn't mine, money transferred from accounts I hadn't touched, and property sold before I even knew it was listed. The papers were crisp, organized, undeniable. The first time I'd seen real numbers behind my parents' choices, something inside me shifted like a floorboard I'd trusted all my life had suddenly given way. At 8, my phone rang. It was Hayden. Her voice was composed, but the words came heavier than usual. "We'll meet at my office this morning. Bring everything, bank statements, letters, those property files." I told her I would, then sat still for a while, staring at the closed blinds. It was strange realizing how easy it had been for them to use my steadiness as an excuse to take more. I thought of every time they'd called me responsible, every time I'd been told Luke just needed a little help getting on his feet. The pattern stretched back farther than I wanted to admit. By the time I arrived downtown, the air had turned sharp, a pale winter light bouncing off the glass buildings. Hayden's assistant led me into the small conference room where folders were already spread across the table. Hayden stood beside them, sleeves rolled up, calm and direct. "I've reviewed what you sent," she said, motioning for me to sit. "This isn't a few bad choices. It's systematic loans, property transfers, forged authorizations. It looks like it's been happening for years." Her tone was measured, but her eyes told me she'd seen this before, just not always within one family. "We'll go step by step. I'll need your full cooperation." I nodded, sliding the folder across to her. We spent hours sorting through records, signatures that repeated the same unnatural loop wire transfers that moved just before holidays, and accounts that connected my parents to Luke in ways I'd never known. When she spoke again, it was careful and clear. "We can pursue this civilly, but depending on how far it goes, law enforcement might need to be involved. I don't want to move without your consent." I didn't answer right away. My throat felt dry, my words uncertain. Finally, I said, "Let's find out how deep it goes. Then we'll decide." She nodded. "Fair enough. I'll start preparing a timeline." That evening I returned home with the city lights reflecting off the snow. The apartment was too quiet. On my desk, a photo frame faced down the one of all of us at Christmas last year, matching sweaters and smiles that felt borrowed. I picked it up and turned it over, studying the picture as if it belonged to someone else's family. For the first time, I saw how much space there had been between me and the rest of them, even in that single frame. The next day, Riley called. Her voice carried that blend of guilt and relief that comes with finally being believed. "They did it to me too," she said. After I asked about Grandma's estate, suddenly I was the problem. She told me about $40,000 that had vanished from her inheritance, about rumors my parents had started to discredit her. I've been gathering records ever since she said, "You're not the only one." She asked if we could meet. I agreed and suggested a coffee shop near the courthouse neutral ground. When I walked in, she was already there, a file open in front of her. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her, steadier too. We spoke quietly, the noise of the espresso machine filling the gaps. "They've been selling family properties for years," Riley said. "Your name and mine are on more than one deed. I can prove it." She slid another folder across the table. Inside were copies of old emails, scanned checks, and a list of transfers labeled maintenance reimbursements. None of it matched what I remembered. I felt the weight of it settle into my chest. "I don't know why I'm surprised," I said, finally keeping my voice even. "I guess I thought they'd draw the line somewhere." Riley looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "They don't stop unless someone makes them." After we parted, I sat in my car for several minutes, hands on the steering wheel, letting the heater fill the silence. There was no sudden anger, no burst of betrayal, just a slow, steady understanding of what needed to happen next. I'd spent years fixing problems, smoothing edges, telling myself family came first. Maybe the only way to keep that belief from turning hollow was to finally confront what it had cost me. That night, I called my mentor, Carolyn. She listened without interrupting the way she always did when I was sorting through hard choices. When I finished, she exhaled softly. "Document everything," she said. "You can't argue feelings against paper. Make a record they can't rewrite." I could almost hear her smile through the line, "And don't let them pull you into their chaos." Facts first, emotion later. After the call, I sat at my desk and began sorting through files. Noelle stayed late that evening, helping organize the piles into labeled folders, bank accounts, property transfers, forged documents, digital copies. She worked quietly, methodically, until the office lights dimmed against the dark outside. When we finished, she closed the final binder and wrote on the cover in neat, steady letters, "Family Ledger Evidence." Then she looked at me and said softly, "You know this isn't just paperwork, right?" I nodded, but the only thing I could manage in return was, "It's a start." Over the next few days, the work consumed me. I canceled social plans, skipped gym sessions, and buried myself in records until my eyes blurred. Every new document seemed to fit another piece of the puzzle proof of a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. Somewhere along the way, the shock wore off and clarity took its place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft hidden behind family tradition. Hayden called again midweek. My partners reviewed the file, she said. "We're willing to take your case pro bono. It qualifies as financial exploitation, potentially even elder abuse in reverse." She paused before continuing. "You're not alone in this, Mara. We'll help you see it through." Her words were steady, but they landed like a promise I didn't realize I'd been waiting for. I thanked her and hung up, setting the phone down on the stack of color-coded folders that now covered my desk. The outlines of a plan were taking shape, clear, deliberate, and no longer reactionary. I wasn't just responding anymore. I was preparing. That Friday, Noelle brought takeout to the office, and we ate among the papers, the smell of sesame noodles mixing with the faint scent of printer ink. "You've been at this non-stop," she said gently. "When's the last time you slept?" I smiled a little, shaking my head. "It's fine. Once everything's in order, I'll rest." She watched me for a long moment before returning to her food. I knew she understood what it meant to stay in motion, just to keep from unraveling. Late that night, after she'd gone home, I sat alone in the office, the glow of the desk lamp spilling across the documents. I reached for a clean sheet of paper and wrote the words, Family ledger, again, this time in bold, deliberate strokes. Beneath it, I began a new list, every payment, every favor, every withdrawal I could trace over the past decade. The total at the bottom made me set the pen down. Nearly $300,000. I leaned back in my chair, letting the numbers settle. They weren't just figures on a page anymore. They were a record of every time I'd said yes, when I should have asked questions. Every moment I'd believed doing the right thing would eventually balance itself out. I realized then that silence had been the currency they counted on most. Before leaving for the night, I locked the binder in my desk drawer and turned off the light. The office felt different in the dark, emptier, but steadier somehow. Tomorrow, I would meet with Hayden again, this time with a full accounting of what had been taken. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like direction. The storm wasn't over, but I knew exactly where it was heading. By Saturday morning, the city was glazed with thin winter sunlight that turned every window pane to silver. My office still smelled faintly of coffee from the night before, and the neat rows of folders covered most of my desk. I had spent half the night reviewing every page again, circling dates, cross-checking bank transfers, making sure nothing was missing. When I called Hayden at 7, she answered immediately. "We're ready to move," she said, her voice calm. "Once we organize it chronologically, the pattern will be impossible to dispute." I glanced at the thick stack of records, the color-coded tabs that marked years of transactions. "Then we start now," I told her. For the next several hours, we worked side by side in quiet rhythm. Hayden read line items aloud while I verified each number against my digital records. Every few minutes, she'd mark something with a yellow tab, murmuring, "That connects to the Florida property," or "That transfer matches your father's signature." It wasn't just data anymore. It was a decade's worth of proof, the story my family had rewritten in private and signed with my name. At noon, I stepped into the break room where Noelle had set out sandwiches and bottled water. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her expression was all focus. "You've been at this since dawn," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "These are the last 6 statements. I cross-referenced everything with what Riley gave you." I opened it and found her notes, neat handwriting, small arrows, each page marked with quiet precision. "You didn't have to do all this," I said, but she shook her head. "I wanted to. People like your parents count on us feeling alone when we're not." Later that afternoon, Carolyn stopped by the office, her coat still dusted with snow. She looked over the organized piles with a quiet nod. "You've done your homework," she said, picking up one of the binders. "Now you make it visible." I raised an eyebrow. "Visible." She smiled slightly. "You've kept these betrayals in the dark for too long. When you present the truth, do it in daylight. No anger, no speeches, just facts that can't be denied." Her words stayed with me long after she left. By evening, the files were ready. Every page had been scanned, labeled, and printed again. The final binder, thick, leather-bound with the label Family Ledger Comprehensive Record, sat in the center of my desk. The total figure stared up at me in crisp black ink, $297, $842.06. I ran a finger along the edge of the page, then closed it slowly. The number didn't scare me anymore. It clarified things. When the clock struck 8, I sent a message to Riley confirming our meeting for the next day. Her reply came instantly. "I'll be there. Bring everything." I could almost hear her voice, steady, unshaken. It reminded me of the summer we were teenagers, sitting on the back porch while my parents argued inside. Back then, she'd leaned over and whispered, "They only win when you stop believing you have choices." It had sounded simple then. Now I understood it for what it really was, a warning I hadn't listened to soon enough. That night, as I turned off the lights, I paused by the framed photograph of my parents on the credenza. It was from my father's retirement party 5 years earlier. My mother's hand rested on his shoulder, both smiling for the camera, the perfect image of pride and permanence. For a moment, I studied the faces that had shaped most of my life, the same faces that had signed my name in blue ink on documents I never saw. Then I placed the picture face down and locked the door behind me. Sunday morning, Hayden met me at a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse. She had already ordered coffee for both of us. "I spoke with a partner about your case," she said, setting her cup down. "He agrees. This isn't just exploitation, it's coordinated fraud. We'll have leverage if we bring law enforcement in, but it's your decision." I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream spread through it. "If I file criminal charges, there's no going back," I said. "No family dinners, no pretending." She nodded. Sometimes truth doesn't leave room for pretending. When I returned to the office later that day, Noelle was waiting with a small stack of envelopes. "Your cousin dropped these off," she said. "She wanted you to read them before tomorrow." Inside were copies of old letters between my parents and a property manager in Florida. Each one detailed the sale of the vacation home Riley and I had both inherited, signed with the same looping signature that wasn't mine. At the bottom of one page in my father's handwriting was a note, "She'll never notice." The ink had faded, but the intent was clear. I sat down, pressing my hands together to keep them from shaking. The office was silent, except for the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Somewhere between one document and the next, the last of my doubt slipped away. There was no misunderstanding left to uncover, no apology that could rewrite this trail of paper. That evening, Hayden called to confirm our plan. "We'll organize everything into presentation packets," she said. "One for each person involved. We'll go through the records line by line during the meeting." I agreed already, picturing the layout in my conference room, the polished table, the neat stacks of folders, the chairs positioned across from one another. For once, I wouldn't be the one called to fix a crisis. I would be the one naming it. The next 3 days moved quickly. Noelle and I stayed late every night, sorting and labeling until the entire story fit into color-coded binders. Yellow for financial records, blue for property, red for correspondence. Each binder carried the same quiet precision as a final audit. On the third night, as she sealed the last envelope, Noelle looked at me across the desk. "You know this changes everything," she said softly. I nodded. "That's the point." By Thursday morning, I mailed certified letters to my parents, to Luke, and to Sam. Each one was identical, an invitation to a family financial review meeting at my home office on Saturday at 10 a.m. I made sure the phrasing was professional, the tone respectful. I didn't expect them to take it seriously until they realized who else had been copied on the correspondence, Hayden Miles Eskew. By Friday night, I had everything arranged. The large table in my office gleamed under the recessed lights. 6 chairs faced me from the far side, each with a water glass and a copy of the agenda. The binders were lined up in the center, like chapters of a story waiting to be read aloud. I stood for a long time studying the symmetry of it all. It was the kind of preparation I'd done 100 times for clients only. This time, the business was personal. Noelle lingered by the door coat over her arm. "You sure you're ready?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "I've been ready for a long time." She looked at the binders, then back at me. "I'll be here at 9 to help set up." I thanked her, and after she left the house, grew still again. I walked to my desk and unlocked the top drawer, pulling out the leather-bound family ledger. Inside, every transaction was neatly recorded, ending with the final total I'd tallied a few nights earlier. I stared at the number, then closed the book and whispered to the empty room. Tomorrow they'll see it too. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, washing the windows in soft amber light. The air carried that fragile quiet that comes before a storm, not the kind that howls, but the kind that shifts everything once it passes. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the city glow to spill across the polished table. The scene was ready, the evidence arranged. Tomorrow I wouldn't be explaining myself. I would be showing them what they'd built, one signature at a time. Saturday came with a stillness that felt heavier than silence. The morning light filtered through the blinds in thin stripes falling across the table I'd spent the past week preparing. Every detail was deliberate. The documents aligned, the pens arranged neatly beside water glasses, the evidence waiting beneath the calm surface of a polished conference table. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee, and for a moment I could almost pretend this was any other business meeting. Noelle arrived just after 9, her usual easy confidence muted by the gravity of the day. She carried a tray of pastries she probably knew no one would touch. "Everything's in place," she said, surveying the room with a steady gaze. "You've done this kind of presentation 100 times. The difference is, who's sitting across from you?" I gave a small nod. "I just need them to hear it." By 10, the doorbell rang. My parents arrived first, dressed for a brunch that didn't exist. My mother's pearl earrings caught the light as she stepped inside her perfume carrying that familiar mix of lavender and determination. My father followed his expression, unreadable, his voice formal when he greeted Noelle. Luke trailed behind, shoulders tight. Sam's smile stretched too wide beside him. Riley came last, binder in hand, her presence grounding me. Hayden joined moments later, a calm center of quiet authority. We all settled around the table. I took the seat at the head, the same position I used for client briefings. "Thank you all for coming." I began, keeping my tone even. "I've asked you here to address some serious concerns regarding shared financial matters." My mother gave a small, uncertain laugh. "Mara, darling, this seems a bit formal for family business." I opened the binder in front of me, the pages whispering against each other. "Formality is necessary when money and signatures are involved." I slid the first document across the table. "This is a detailed record of financial support I've provided to this family over the past 15 years. My father's hand paused halfway to his coffee. Luke leaned back, arms crossed. Hayden distributed copies to everyone, her voice calm as she explained the documentation. "These statements have been verified through bank records and account audits. The totals are accurate." When my mother's eyes landed on the figure at the bottom of the page, she went very still. My father cleared his throat, a reflexive sound he made when cornered. "Mara, this isn't how families operate," he said carefully. "We don't keep score." I looked directly at him. Apparently someone has been keeping score. I just didn't know it was me. I pressed a button on the small remote in my hand, and the monitor behind me came to life. A still image appeared, a grainy security camera shot from the bank dated 3 months earlier. My brother stood at the counter, my driver's license in his hand. "That's you, Luke," I said quietly. His face flushed. "That's absurd," he said, pushing his chair back. "You're twisting things." Hayden's tone remained steady. "The footage was provided directly by the bank. The timestamp aligns with the attempted withdrawals on Ms. Ellison's account." My mother's voice rose sharp with panic. "After everything we've done for you, how can you attack your family this way?" I turned to her. "You tried to access my account the same week you gave Luke $85,000 for his down payment. You told me I was too independent to need help. But independence doesn't mean I owe you silence." Across the table, Sam's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes moved from Luke to my parents and back again. "Is this true?" she asked quietly. Luke didn't answer. Hayden laid the next document in front of them, a copy of the Florida property sale Riley had uncovered. Riley opened her folder. "These signatures were forged," she said, her voice firm. "The handwriting analysis confirms it. The funds were divided among your accounts, not ours." My father's shoulders sagged. My mother's eyes darted between us, her composure slipping. "You don't understand?" she said, almost pleading. "We were only trying to help Luke get a start. You've always been fine, Mara." I met her gaze. "Fine doesn't mean invisible." Luke stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. "I don't have to sit here and be accused of things you can't prove." I clicked the remote again. The next slide was an audio recording. His voice filled the room, careless laughing. "All you have to do is mention Dad's medical bills, and Mara writes another check. She never notices when a little extra disappears." The sound of his own words seemed to hang in the air. Sam covered her mouth. My mother looked stricken while my father stared at the floor. Luke moved toward the door, but Hayden stepped into his path. "I recommend you sit down," she said calmly. "We're not finished." Riley placed another set of documents on the table, this time the correspondence from my grandparents' estate. "The Florida sale isn't the only issue," she said. "The same signatures appear on several transfers connected to other properties. If this continues, it's not just civil, it's criminal." My mother's voice trembled. "You can't do this to your own family." I looked around the table, my voice steady. "You did this. Every transfer, every forged name, every excuse disguised as love. I'm not doing anything except bringing it into the light." Hayden rested her pen against her notepad, letting the silence stretch. "Ms. Ellison has 2 choices prepared for you," she said finally. "A repayment plan or formal charges. I advise you to read carefully before you respond." The room was motionless except for the faint tick of the clock on the wall. My mother reached for the pen first, her hand trembling as she flipped open the agreement. My father hesitated, his jaw tightening, but he didn't argue. Even Luke, who had spent his life being rescued, seemed to understand this time there was no one left to save him. When the last signature was on the page, I closed the binder and stood. "This ends today," I said. My voice didn't rise, but it carried through the quiet room like something solid. Hayden gathered the documents, her expression unreadable. "We'll follow up with the payment schedule next week," she said. Riley slid her folder into her bag and gave me a small, steady nod. Noelle moved quietly around the table, clearing glasses, her calm presence anchoring the space. My parents stood unsure what to do with their hands. Luke looked younger than I'd ever seen him, pale and uncertain. As they left, my mother turned at the doorway. "We never meant to hurt you," she said softly. "We just wanted everyone to have what they needed." I didn't answer. There were no words left that could rewrite what had already been signed. When the door finally closed behind them, the room felt larger, emptier, and strangely quiet. Noelle began stacking the leftover folders, her movements deliberate and gentle. They signed, she said, her tone somewhere between disbelief and relief. I nodded, exhaling for what felt like the first time all day. Outside, the late afternoon light slanted through the windows, cutting long shadows across the table. The binders remained open, each one a record of truth too long delayed. Tomorrow would bring its own work calls, follow-ups, paperwork, but for now, the house was still. I walked to the window and watched their car disappear down the street. Somewhere between anger and exhaustion, something lighter stirred a quiet that didn't feel empty but earned. Behind me, the clock ticked steadily, marking the end of one story and the beginning of another. The next step would decide whether this peace could last or whether old debts would try to rise again. The house was quiet again once the door closed behind them. I stood by the window for a long time watching the street until their car turned the corner and disappeared. The calm that followed didn't feel like victory. It felt like a held breath, finally exhaled. Across the table, the papers were still neatly stacked, each page carrying the weight of 15 years' worth of buried truths. Noelle collected the empty glasses and smoothed the tablecloth. "They signed," she said quietly. "It's done." I nodded, though I knew this wasn't an ending yet, only the moment when denial gave way to consequence. Later that evening, I met Hayden and Riley at a small restaurant near the waterfront, the kind with soft lighting and the low hum of weekend conversations blending into the sound of waves outside. Hayden reviewed the signed repayment agreement, flipping through the pages with practiced care. "This is solid," she said. "We'll file the notarized copies Monday morning. Once payments begin, the account will stay under escrow supervision." She glanced up at me. "They can't back out without legal repercussions." Riley leaned back, relief crossing her face for the first time since this began. "It's more than I thought we'd get," she said. "They never admit to anything, let alone sign their names beside it." I stirred the lemon slice in my glass, watching it spin. The sound of laughter from a nearby table drifted over normal life, the kind I used to think would always include my family. Now it belonged to someone else. "What happens if they default?" I asked. Hayden's expression softened. "Then we move to enforcement. But my guess is they'll comply. Losing you has already cost them more than the money ever could." When I got home, the house felt different. The air was lighter, but the silence had its own kind of echo. I left the lights off and walked through each room, the glow from the street lamps stretching across the floorboards. The office door was still open. The conference table cleared, except for one binder, the family ledger. I ran my hand along its leather cover before placing it carefully in the drawer. For years, my generosity had been a quiet agreement. That silence had ended now. The following week moved slowly. Each morning brought new emails from Hayden's office, updates on filings and acknowledgments from the escrow firm. Riley forwarded a copy of her restitution notice for the Florida property. Her voice in the voicemail she left was light, almost relieved. "First payment's cleared," she said. "It's real this time." I smiled to myself as I deleted the message. Real. That word hadn't felt safe to use in a while. On Wednesday, Luke called from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me later that night. His voice was strained, the kind of forced calm that barely hides panic. "Mara, we're selling the house," he said. "We don't have a choice. The payments start next month and Mom and Dad can't keep up." There was a pause, then softer. "I don't know what happened to us." I listened twice, then deleted the message without saving it. The choice had already been made long before today. A few days later, Noelle stepped into my office carrying a courier envelope. "From your parents," she said, setting it on the desk. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, my mother's looping script. Inside was a check for the first repayment folded inside a note written on her monogrammed stationery. "We're sorry." 2 words, nothing else. I held it for a while, reading them over and over, trying to find meaning in their simplicity. No excuses, no explanations, just acknowledgement. I placed the check into the restitution folder Hayden had prepared, labeling it Installment 1. That weekend, I drove to the lake house my agent had called about months earlier, the same tutor I once lost in a bidding war. The buyers had backed out and the property was available again. When I stepped inside, sunlight spilled through tall windows, catching the dust in the air like floating gold. The place still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The real estate agent smiled as she handed me the folder of closing documents. "The seller liked that your offer was clean," she said. "No financing contingencies." My signature flowed easily across the pages this time. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, only finality. When I walked out with the keys in hand, I stood on the front steps for a moment, looking at the maple trees that lined the street. The same ones I'd dreamed of building a reading bench under. The house was mine now, not because someone gave it to me, but because I'd reclaimed what was taken. Back home, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window watching the light fade across the skyline. My phone vibrated with a message from Hayden. "Everything's been filed. The case is officially closed." I sent back a short reply. "Thank you for everything." Her response came a moment later. "You did the hard part." In the weeks that followed, the payments began arriving like clockwork. Each check came folded neatly with no note enclosed. I deposited them into the designated account and logged the dates in a small notebook I kept in my desk. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about accountability written in ink. Riley called often, her tone lighter each time. "They sold the Cadillac," she said once, almost laughing. "And the boat. They're moving into a smaller place near the park." I listened quietly, the words landing somewhere between closure and disbelief. By early spring, the first flowers were pushing through the frost. My work picked up again, new clients filling the calendar Noelle kept pinned beside her desk. One afternoon, Carolyn dropped by, unannounced, a soft smile on her face. "You look lighter," she said. I poured her coffee and told her about the lake house, about the repayment checks and the quiet that had followed. She listened, then said gently, "You finally turned your independence into freedom. They can't redefine it anymore." Her words settled deep, not as praise, but as recognition. That evening, I drove out to the lake house to begin setting up the space. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and early rain. Inside, I opened the windows, letting the cool breeze move through the rooms. The walls echoed softly as I unpacked a few boxes, books, framed photos, and the same ceramic lamp I'd kept since college. By the time the sun dipped low, the space felt lived in. On the mantel above the fireplace, I placed a framed copy of my family ledger's final page, the one marked, "Account Settled." It wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping, the kind that restores balance. I sat down on the sofa, the quiet settling around me like a blanket. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Noelle, Rebecca, and Riley are coming by tomorrow to help you unpack. Hayden wants to drop off the final escrow confirmation. I typed back, "Tell them to bring champagne." Her reply came with a smile emoji followed by, "You earned it." As I looked around the room, the flicker of the fireplace reflected in the window glass. The lake beyond shimmered under the moonlight, calm and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the pull of what I owed or what was taken. The house, the peace, the quiet, all of it was mine, built from the wreckage of what used to be family loyalty. The next day would bring familiar faces and new beginnings, but for now, I just listened to the soft rhythm of the lake outside and the crackle of wood in the fireplace. The hardest part was over, and the next chapter waited with open doors. By late spring, the world outside my window looked new again, green, stretching past the lake, the kind of sunlight that made the days feel longer than they were. I'd moved into the Tudor house 2 weeks earlier, still half surrounded by boxes, but the air already felt different. The smell of cedar and faint traces of paint had replaced the sterile quiet of my old apartment. This place carried the weight of something earned. Noelle arrived first that afternoon, balancing a small pot of basil and mint she'd picked up from a nursery near her apartment. "For your kitchen window," she said, setting it beside the sink. "It'll smell like summer every morning." A few minutes later, Riley's car pulled into the drive. She came in carrying a woven blanket the same colors as the sunset outside, rust cream and soft gold. "You'll need this when fall comes," she said. Then Hayden appeared, her arrival marked by the low growl of her sedan in the driveway and the quiet click of her heels on the front steps. She carried a bottle of scotch and a manila folder. The four of us gathered around the dining table. Hayden set the folder down before uncorking the bottle. "It's official," she said, sliding a single page toward me. "Final escrow confirmation. All agreements have been verified and filed. It's over." Her words hung in the air like the soft drop of a curtain. Riley reached across and tapped the page with her finger. "You did it," she said. "They actually followed through." I nodded slowly, still absorbing what that meant. The payments had arrived every month, steady as clockwork, and with each deposit the past had begun to lose its grip. Hayden poured 4 glasses, the amber liquid catching the afternoon light. "To independence," she said, raising hers. Riley smiled, echoing softly. "To freedom." Noelle added, "To boundaries that hold." When my turn came, I lifted my glass last. "To chosen family," I said quietly. The sound of clinking glass filled the room, a small solid sound against the hum of the lake wind outside. After the first sip, Hayden leaned back in her chair. "I ran into your brother's attorney last week," she said. "The house sold at a short price. Your parents listed the Cadillac and the boat too." She hesitated before continuing. "They've moved into a senior complex across town. I let the information settle." Riley gave a small nod. "The timeshare payments cleared for me yesterday," she said. "Every dollar accounted for." There was no sense of triumph in the room, only quiet confirmation. Noelle began gathering the empty glasses, moving with the calm efficiency that had anchored me more times than I could count. When she returned from the kitchen, she looked around at all of us. "You built something stronger than what you lost," she said. "That counts for more than they'll ever understand." I didn't respond, but I knew she was right. As evening drew in, the house warmed with the glow of the fireplace. Riley unfolded the blanket and draped it across the back of the sofa, while Hayden refilled the glasses. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and citrus from the herbs Noelle had brought. Outside, the lake reflected the fading gold of sunset ripples spreading softly toward the far shore. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was shared like a breath held in gratitude. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a framed printout of the final page from my family ledger, the one marked "Account Settled." The black letters caught the flickering light, steady and certain. Hayden broke the silence first. "You know," she said, "when you first came to my office, I expected another case that would end in compromise, but you never flinched. You made them face what they built." Her voice softened. "That's rare." I looked toward the mantel, toward the word "settled," and simply said, "It was time." The night stretched easy after that. Riley and Noelle traded stories from the weeks we'd all missed Riley's new job at the nonprofit, Noelle's first trip planned in years. The conversation drifted between laughter and quiet reflection, the way it does when people who've weathered the same storm finally sit down in calm water. When the clock struck 9, Hayden gathered her folder and stood. "I should head back before it gets too dark," she said. Riley followed soon after, leaving her mug half full on the table. Noelle lingered a little longer, checking that the last candle had been blown out. "You'll be fine here tonight?" she asked. I smiled. "For the first time in a long time, yes." After they left, I walked through the house, turning off lights one by one. The lake shimmered through the windows, silver under the moonlight. I stepped outside onto the back deck, the boards cool beneath my feet. The air smelled of pine and water, clean and calm. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called a sound that always seemed to echo through the stillness like a memory. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. The screen lit with a number I hadn't deleted: my mother. I watched it ring until the sound faded, leaving only the reflection of the lake in the dark glass. I set it down on the railing and looked out at the water again, letting the silence return. Inside, the framed ledger page still sat on the mantel, a quiet reminder that what's been taken can be reclaimed. The repayment checks the new house, the friendships forged in the aftermath, all of it added up to something that couldn't be measured in dollars. I walked back inside, locking the door behind me. The fireplace had burned low, the last embers glowing faintly red. In that dim light, the house felt full, not with noise, but with peace. I sat down on the sofa and let the quiet settle over me, the kind that comes only after years of keeping balance for everyone else. Outside, the moon hung low over the water, the reflection breaking gently with each ripple. The phone buzzed once more before falling silent. I didn't pick it up. Some conversations I'd learned didn't need to be answered. Tomorrow, I'd meet Hayden again to finalize the last filings, and Riley would come by with new keys to her rental near the city. Life was moving forward quietly, deliberately, just as it should. I leaned back, letting my eyes close for a moment, the sound of the lake steady against the shore. When I opened them again, the fire had gone out completely, leaving only the faint glow from the mantel above it. The words on the frame caught what little light remained steady, final, and true. Account settled. The night deepened around the house, soft and still. Somewhere outside, an owl called from the trees. I sat in the dark, feeling the weight of years lift one breath at a time, knowing that what came next would belong entirely to me. The next morning began with sunlight spilling across the lake, the kind of gentle gold that softens everything it touches. I woke before the alarm, the air cool against the open window, and for a moment I simply listened, the hush of water moving against the dock, the faint rustle of wind through the trees. It was quiet in the way I used to imagine peace would sound. After breakfast, I carried a stack of mail to the desk in my new home office. Among the usual envelopes was one addressed in my mother's familiar handwriting. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was another repayment check, smaller this time, and a short note. "We're trying to do better. No apologies, no explanations. Just those 5 words." I placed the check into the restitution folder, slid the note beside it, and closed the drawer. It didn't sting anymore. It just felt like closure, written in small, cautious handwriting. By afternoon, Riley arrived with sandwiches and 2 cups of coffee. We sat on the back deck overlooking the lake, the sunlight reflecting off the water in soft ripples. "They've moved into the senior complex," she said. "It's modest, but peaceful." I nodded, not wishing them harm, not wishing anything at all. Time had already started doing what I couldn't, softening the edges. "You look content," she added, smiling. "Different." I glanced out toward the water. "Maybe that's what happens when the noise finally stops," I said. When Riley left, I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking a few last boxes. Old family photos, business awards, a stack of letters from clients I'd helped over the years. Near the bottom of one box, I found a Christmas picture I'd almost thrown away, the one where we all wore matching sweaters, smiles fixed and bright under the glow of the tree lights. I studied it for a moment before tucking it into the back of a drawer. Not to forget, but to put it where it belonged, somewhere behind me. Later that week, Hayden stopped by for what she called a final follow-up, though it felt more like a visit between friends. She handed me a small envelope with the official closing notice from the escrow account. "All balances paid," she said, tapping the page with her neatly manicured nail. "This chapter's over, Mara." We stood for a while at the window, watching the lake shimmer beneath the late afternoon sun. "You know," she said, "people think justice always looks like punishment. But sometimes it just looks like peace." That night, after everyone had gone, I lit a fire and made a cup of tea. The house smelled faintly of wood and lavender from the sachet Riley had left on the mantel. I sat by the window watching the light from the fire dance against the glass. My phone buzzed once, a new message from my father. "We hope you're doing well." I read it twice, then set the phone face down beside me. There was no anger left, only distance that finally felt right. As the flame settled into soft embers, I thought about what independence had meant all these years. For most of my life, it was the word my parents used to excuse neglect, something to admire when it was convenient and criticize when it wasn't. But sitting there that night, I understood it differently. Independence wasn't the absence of care, it was the presence of self-respect. The strength to build a life that couldn't be taken, borrowed, or rewritten. Through the window, the moonlight stretched across the water in a silver path. Somewhere in the quiet, I could hear a loon calling again, its echo carrying over the lake. I wrapped the blanket Riley had given me around my shoulders and let the sound linger. It wasn't a reminder of loneliness anymore. It was proof that peace could be loud in its own gentle way. When the clock struck 10, I closed the family ledger for the final time and placed it on the bookshelf beside my favorite business journals. It belonged there now, not as evidence, but as history. My story had started in numbers, balances, withdrawals, debts, but it was ending in something less measurable, a steady life built from truth, one quiet day at a time. Before turning in, I stepped out onto the porch one last time. The air carried the faint scent of pine and early summer rain. The house behind me glowed with soft light, the kind that feels earned rather than borrowed. I looked up at the stars scattered across the sky and whispered a simple promise to myself to keep my peace, guarded my boundaries strong, and my heart open only to those who valued both. If you've ever had to rebuild from betrayal, you know it's not revenge that heals you, it's the courage to keep standing when silence would have been easier. I learned that independence doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means choosing peace, even when others call it distance. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of your own, take a moment to share it, or just sit quietly and let it settle. And if you believe peace is something worth fighting for, stay a while. There are more stories waiting by the fire.